folks, thanks so much for stopping by and helping me kick off my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the things that you need to get started candle making. So if you're new to candle making, maybe you've tried in the past and felt a little bit overwhelmed or intimidated, or you just haven't known where to get started, then this video is for you. My name's Natalie. I'm from Gilded Nights, which is a New York City-based bath and candle company. And on this channel, I'm hoping to talk about all things soaping, candle making, as well as the journey of starting and running a small business. But let's kick things off. The first thing that we need to consider when making candles is what our heat source is going to be. For most folks, this is either a microwave or a stovetop. If you have a small living space, if you like to keep your crafting and your cooking separate, or you don't have a microwave or a stovetop, you might want to consider something like this. This is a heating plate that I bought off Amazon. I think it was like $17, and I found it super helpful. Since I live in a tiny New York City apartment, being able to expand the areas in which I can craft to like my living room has been really, really helpful. So for some folks, that might be the first step, is to consider maybe adding a heating plate. We need to think about, what are we actually going to cook, or melt, I should say, our wax in. So if you are using a microwave, you are going to need a heat-safe glass bowl. If you are using a stovetop, or if you're using a heating plate, you're going to have a few more options. So one of the things that's most important is to create a double boiler. So for me, I just use a pot that I already have, and then for the bowl that you're going to put on top of that, you can either use like a heat-safe glass bowl, you can use a stainless steel bowl, or I actually really love these pitchers. I purchased these off Amazon. You can usually find them made out of stainless steel or aluminum, and they're relatively inexpensive. I think I paid under $10 for the smaller one, and I think the taller one, I think I paid about $17. And it really just comes down to personal preference and what you already have on hand. Moving on, now you need to consider, what are you going to use to stir your wax? And after looking through a number of different forums, this appears to be like a widely debated, contested issue. So some folks are super pro using wood. Other folks believe that wood is porous and it absorbs like the wax and the scent. For me, I'm personally a fan of using like silicone. So I use this like silicone spatula that came in a 4-piece set. I purchased the set off Amazon for $7. Some people use like a wooden spoon, or like the handle of a wooden spoon. Some people use chopsticks. Some people use like paint stirrers. Some people use like a metal ladle. And I would say just try what you have on hand and see kind of what speaks to you, what gives you the best results. The next thing to consider is what type of thermometer you want to use. I don't know about you, but before I started candle making, I didn't realize how exact of a science it was. So I didn't realize that we needed to heat it up to a certain temperature before we could add the fragrance, and that we needed to pour at a certain temperature to avoid like major cosmetic issues like wet spots, or to focus on things like glass adhesion. There were so many different things I just didn't know. And for this, you have two main options. You can use a regular thermometer, or you can use a digital thermometer. I don't think one offers a better performance than the other. It really comes down to personal preference. I didn't have any on hand when I got started, so I purchased an infrared thermometer. I think I bought this off Amazon. It was like under $20, and it had a 15% off coupon, which was really helpful. I find it really nice to use. I like the fact that if I like point, it'll beep. My only word of advice when using like an infrared thermometer like this is that it does read the temperature at the surface. So I've always found it helpful to take the temperature while I'm stirring, just for better, more accurate results. But either of them are totally fine. The last piece of equipment that we're going to consider today is we are going to be talking about scales. Kind of tying back in with the thermometer, I didn't realize how important it was to have accurate measurements for like our fragrance oils and our waxes. So I find it really helpful to have like a digital scale like this. This one was like 19 bucks and change on Amazon, and I use it so often. I use it for my concrete crafting, I use it for soap making, I use it for candle making. So now that we've kind of covered the equipment, we can focus more on the fun stuff, the actual candle supplies. So this one right here is a vessel that I purchased from the Flaming Candle. There are so many different places that you can purchase vessels from. Pretty much every candle supply store also sells candle vessels. So I would say the biggest criteria that you should have is that your vessels are not porous and that they're not flammable. Porous materials will or have the potential to absorb the wax and almost act as like a wick and become flammable. So we just want that to not happen. So for materials like concrete, for terracotta, for ceramics, we just want to make sure that they're sealed properly, so that way like the wax doesn't seep into the vessel. Next, we get to talk about like the type of wax that we're going to use in a candle. So I just have a little thing of wax here. And there's just so many different types. There's beeswax, there's paraffin, there's coconut apricot. Yeah, it's a little bit overwhelming. And then there's blends of those different waxes. I think the best advice that I could tell you is just pick one. I think it really just depends on like what your standards are. The biggest thing though is just like picking one. I personally love like a coconut apricot wax, but I definitely went on a journey. I started with like pure 100% soy wax. Then I went to coconut soy, and then I just absolutely fell in love with coconut apricot wax, so that's my biggest thing. But it's just different strokes for different folks, so it's just a matter of like trying them out, seeing what you like. Like you're married to the wax, so you can make the right decision for yourself. Next, we get to talk about one of my favorite parts. I don't know how many of you are like me and like you're weak for fragrance oils. Like I have way too many. Like an obscene amount of fragrance oils. I think I went a little bit crazy when I first started soaping and candle making, but fragrances like this one here is from Midwest Fragrance Co. This Black Sea, it's one of my husband's favorites, it's one of my favorites. I'm gonna do a sniff while we're here. It smells so good. But it's really important that you are choosing a fragrance that is candle safe. So one of the best ways to go about checking if a fragrance oil is candle safe is to check out the IFRA certificate. And the IFRA is like the International Fragrance Association, and they have a list of different categories. So when you go to an IFRA certificate, you're going to look under category 12, and that is the classification for things like incense and candles and air fresheners. And you're going to look at the maximum like usage rate, and that will tell you the percentage that it is safe to use that fragrance oil. And if it is 0% on that certificate, that means that that fragrance oil is not safe to use. If the fragrance that you are using does not have an IFRA certificate, I would be like a little bit concerned. The last thing that we're going to talk about is probably also the most complicated, and that is the wicks. I don't know how many of you also just feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of choices. You can either do wickless is becoming a thing now, especially with like candle warmers. You can do wooden wicks, and then with wooden wicks there's like the crackling, and then there's like the whisper wicks, then there's like the zinc core wicks, and then there's cotton wicks, and then within the cotton wicks there's so many different brands. I have a few examples here just to show you. And then what I found most helpful when I first got started was going to Candle Science, and I would check out their wick guide. What I would do is I would select the candle wax that seemed most similar to the wax that I was planning to use, and I would put in the dimensions of the vessel that I was planning to use, and I would look at their recommendations. So for me, I was recommended like the Eco series, and what I did is I purchased a wick sample pack from, I want to say, Lone Star Candle Supply. I know a number of different companies have started offering like these wick sample kits, including like Black Tie Barn, including like Hive and Honey, and Lone Star, as I mentioned. And it is so nice to have the option, because I think we all know wick guides are not, they're guides, they're not like the law. So sometimes you're going to notice that the recommended wick is overwicked or underwicked, and it's just nice to not have to wait like an entire week to place like another order for another 12 wicks, and then you're not stuck with like a bunch of wicks you're not going to use. So I'm definitely a huge fan. I think you get the most bang for your buck using like a wick sample pack. I know I just threw a lot of information at you. We just talked about vessels, waxes, we talked about wicks, we talked about fragrances. If that feels like a lot, I think it is. I think it is, because it is. So if you're like me, I get very overwhelmed when I need to make a lot of decisions. And I think there's no shame in using something like a candle kit. Most of these candle supply companies offer these amazing kits that pretty much vary in terms of like the number of fragrances that they offer, the type of candle, the number of candles that they provide you, so you can make like a differing number of candles. So that's, I think, a great option if you want to just like test the waters and see if you even like candle making in the first place. And I can put links to a bunch of like amazing candle supply kits down in the description box below. They are a really great option if you just want to like dip your toes into candle making, and I feel like they set you up for success by taking a lot of the guesswork out for you. Let's start talking about some things that are like nice to haves. They're not necessary, there's some optional things, but I think they will definitely go a long way in making your life easier. So the first thing that I want to talk about are wick stickers. I have these guys here from Brambleberry. I think it was like 100 for $5.99. And what I like about them is that they are basically double-sided stickers that you use to put to the bottom of the wick and can just stick it so that they don't go kind of floating away as your candle is setting. Another thing that I've seen folks do is to use like a hot glue gun and put like a little dab of glue. And I've tried this in the past. I didn't really like it. I actually found it really difficult to reuse the vessels afterwards, just because of like how stuck on there like the glue was. And for me, the ability to like reduce, reuse, recycle is so incredibly important. So I definitely prefer the wick stickers. I feel like they're easier to use. I feel like they're more user friendly, they're more reuse friendly. So I definitely recommend using like a wick sticker. The next thing that we're going to talk about is things that you can use to kind of like center your wicks. So as your candle is setting and like firming up, a lot of times your wicks can kind of like lean off to the side or fall over, and they look a little tipsy. And that's not what we want. It doesn't necessarily look like the most polished or the most professional. So a lot of folks will use something to hold their wicks in place. There are a lot of different options. Like these are super popular. They're metal and they kind of just like rest in a vessel like this, and it'll keep your wick in place as it's setting. I know we're seeing a lot more like Instagrammers and TikTokers use the ones from like Norton Candle Supply that are like designed for like specific vessels, and like those look incredible. The third option is what I do. I have a bunch of these on hand. They're popsicle sticks. I like to use them for stirring or for various crafts, including like soap making. So I have them on hand, and I find that I can reuse them over and over again for centering my wicks. So if it's something that you have on hand, it's something that you might want to consider using to make your life a little bit easier by helping you center your wicks. The next thing that is nice to have but not necessary is actually a heat gun. I purchased this guy off Amazon. It was like under 20 bucks. But if you are working with certain waxes, they can be a little bit temperamental after the first pour. So they may have some air bubbles or sinkholes, or you might not have like a perfectly smooth surface. And that's not cute when you want to give it as like a gift or as a present, or if it's something that you intend to sell. So I highly recommend like a heat gun. Basically, you just use it, you run the heat gun over the surface for like a few seconds, you remelt the wax, and it will kind of smooth out. Another option that you might have that is an alternative to like a heat gun is if you have a blow dryer at your house, you can pretty much use it to do the same exact thing. The next thing that we're going to talk about that some people like to add to their candles is candle dye. So for candle dyes, you have a few different options. You can either use like a liquid candle dye, or you can use like a dye block. I think both of them are valid if you want like just to add some like a pop of color to your candles. They look really, really nice. I think the most important thing is just making sure that the dye that you're using is candle safe. The next thing that we're going to talk about are labels. There are two types of labels that I like to use for my candles. So this one is just a simple 3x3 label. I purchase my labels through, I want to say online labels, but you will also see Avery come up a lot. Both of them do a great job offering free samples, so you can test out different sizes and see what you like. And their shipping times are incredibly fast. So if you want to basically make your candles a little bit special, whether you are planning to list them for sale or whether you're trying to like personalize them for a gift or as a favor. Highly recommend online labels or Avery. A different type of label that I think is very important are these like warning labels. It just comes with like burning instructions and just advice such as burn within sight, keep away from flammable objects, and keep away from children and pets. I think it's just a good way of covering your butt and just reminding people of like proper candle behavior. So those are some things that are like cool to have or cute to have. We're almost there, guys. The last thing that we want to talk about today are things to trim your wicks. Is it just me, or does anyone else have issues with like wick trimmers? I feel like I struggle so hard cutting my wicks with this wick trimmer, so I've just switched to scissors, and I think it was the right choice for me. But I think it's important to trim your wicks. I think a lot of times if we were to just give away our candles to customers or to family or friends, they may not know that they need to keep the wick trimmed. So I highly advise just taking care of it for them, just to avoid any safety risks, flammable risks by having like too long of a wick. So definitely recommend having like a wick cutter of some variety on hand. So I just threw a lot of information at you guys. I hope that this was helpful. As I mentioned before, I'm going to put a bunch of links in the description box below to be helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me in my first video today. If you found this helpful, I would really appreciate like a thumbs up, or if you want to subscribe to hear more from me. And yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by today. Bye, guys.